Hey everyone, welcome to Judging for the Win. I'm Dave, and this is my daily ruling. Today's question was suggested by a viewer. Amy copies the Chapter 1 ability of the creation of Avacyn with Strionic Resonator, and thus exiles 2 cards. What happens when the Chapter 2 ability resolves? What about the Chapter 3 ability? Okay, so the first important fact that we'll need to know is that the abilities on the creation of Avacyn are linked. When the Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 abilities refer to the exiled card, they specifically mean the card that was exiled by the Chapter 1 ability. Now, normally there's just one exiled card, so everything proceeds pretty straightforwardly. But in the case where there are 2 exiled cards, things get a lot more interesting. There could be additional exiled cards because the ability was copied, like what happened here, or because the ability triggered an additional time. The answer is exactly the same. Actually, in the original question that the viewer asked me, he asked what would happen if the ability triggered an additional time. But for technical reasons, that's actually a lot harder to pull off. Check out my video on how Elish Norn interacts with Omnath for some more info on why that is if you're interested. Now, the next important fact that we'll need is that if a linked ability refers to a single object as the exiled card, and there are multiple, then it sees and acts on each of them. So let's see how that specifically applies to the Chapter 2 ability. First, the game needs to know whether the exiled card is a creature card. Because there are 2 exiled cards, the game will get an answer from each of them. If either of those answers is a yes, then the game proceeds to the second instruction, for the player to lose life equal to that card's mana value. Again, because there are 2 exiled cards, the game needs to know the exiled card's mana value, and it gets an answer from both of them. Therefore, if either one of the exiled cards is a creature card, Amy will lose life equal to the sum of the 2 cards' mana values. Ouch. Note that the check of whether the exiled card is a creature card or not is only used to see if the game needs to proceed to the next part of whether the player loses life. Accordingly, it does not matter if both of them are creature cards. The player only loses that life one time. Regarding the Chapter 3 ability, the game will check to see if the exiled card is a creature card using the same criteria as before. If at least one of them is, then Amy can choose to put the exiled card onto the battlefield. This would be accomplished, of course, by performing that action on each of the exiled cards. Now, if Amy had a Grizzly Bears and a Lightning Bolt, she could only put the bear in, because there is this rule here that says if you try to put an instant or sorcery onto the battlefield, it just stays in its current zone. But if Amy exiled a Grizzly Bears and the Great Henge, she could put them both onto the battlefield. Amy could also just leave everything exiled. Because whatever action Amy chooses is performed on each of the exiled cards, it is not possible for her to choose what happens to each card individually. For example, putting a Grizzly Bears on the battlefield and leaving a Walking Ballista exiled. After this, any cards that were not put onto the battlefield will be put into their owner's hands. This would include any instants or sorceries that are still in their current zone after Amy chooses to put something else into play, or all of the cards if Amy chose to leave the cards in exile. Pretty interesting trick, right? That's all I have for you today. How did you do? Join me again next time for another daily ruling. Until then, I hope you have a great day.